what I do may not always come clear through, but I'm really trying to express myself to you. Boy, I'm feeling so divided. I did everything to fight it, but I guess my heart decided to fall into you. This time I won't fail.
If you're running a congressional race, for instance, there's this really interesting organization called the National Committee for an Effective Congress, and they put together these numbers, and it's really how, you know, it's how the presidential race, for example, Obama's campaign would target where they're going to put their resources. So you basically have three categories of precincts or regions, or however you want to look at it. You have ones that are turnout precincts or areas. You have another area that's considered persuadable, and you have another area that's Republican, and we just ignore them. So a GOTV area is an area where you want to turn out as many voters as you can. So if you look on the NCEC report and it says that 70% of the people always vote Democrat, you want to make sure that you focus on turning out the Democrats in that precinct, because you're going to get every vote. Now the others, where you can look at and see that sometimes they vote at 60% for Democrats and sometimes they vote at 40%, so 20% of the people in that precinct are persuadable. So you have to focus that with phone calls, explaining to them why they should support a candidate, and, you know, it's very different because they have to be convinced before you can turn them out, because if you turn them out before you convince them, you might be turning out people who are going to vote against you. So that's kind of how targeting works.
It's a little bit of science, and it's a little bit of guesswork, and it's a little bit of luck.
Yeah, and the larger the race, the more scientific it gets.
Yeah, people will go out and poll. You know, so
I was thinking about that. Poll, altså de meningsmålinger, Gallup og
right, but polling is very, very expensive. I mean, it's in a city of this size. You know, Sacramento has about 485,000 people. It costs, for us to do a citywide poll, a baseline poll would cost us about $20,000 US.
And that's a lot on your budget.
Whew, that's a big bite.
Yeah.
And if you could do it, it's great, because then you could track. And if you're doing tracking polls, your poll numbers after that probably come down to about maybe $9,000 or $10,000 a pop.
It's better
to track if you can afford it. But you know, when we look at a budget for a campaign, the most important thing is to support the field operation. The most important thing is to support, find ways to make sure you have access to data files, to make sure that we've got computer programs where we're able to do input. After volunteers are sitting here at night and they're calling people to ask if they'll support.
So at night,
what's really important about a campaign, and you'll see it as you start to look around at some of these boards, is campaigns rely very, very heavily on volunteers. There's a few people who get paid a salary to work on a campaign, but the majority of political campaigns are done by volunteers. So we have people that come in and they'll call voters. We start this whole process of looking at voter registration files and trying to figure out who are potential people to vote for the mayor.
How do you do that? I mean, what sort of analysis do you use in order to spot people?
It depends on the campaign. There's a variety of ways to look at it. You might look at frequent voters. In a presidential election year like this one, so every 4 years, the number of people who turn out to vote is much higher than people who vote in off-year elections. So if you're in that 2-year cycle, it's really hard. If you're in the 4-year cycle, like for us, it's really big. The voter pool is much bigger. So you look at people who are likely to vote for the mayor, Democrats. You look for people who are frequent voters. The mayor as a woman, a lot of women Democrats are especially interested in voting for the mayor. So, but it's not any one of those things. It's some combination of all of those. Wouldn't you say, Dan?
Yeah, and it works very different in the sense that we're in a nonpartisan race and there are 2 Democrats running. We're the endorsed Democratic candidate, we always have to say. The Democratic Party is supporting Heather. But it's very different in a nonpartisan race because you don't have as good of a handle on it. Because you kind of have to go through the things that Chuck went through and go, this is logically who would be for her based on what she believes or what she's done or where she's from or where she's strong.
We're 18 days out from the election right now. We're almost done with even thinking about the undecideds. We're now looking at all the people who have committed to say, yes, they would vote for the mayor, and just make sure that they've got what they need, that they've gotten their ballots by mail, if they're going to vote by mail, and if they're not, if on election day they're going to go to a polling place to make sure they know where the polling place is, and just keep reminding them over and over and over and over and over and over and over to vote. That's kind of the executive summary.
Yeah, it really is. We're probably in about another 10 days we'll move into the phase we call GOTV.
GOTV, could you elaborate?
Get out the vote.
Yeah.
So GOTV is the period basically where you focus on turning out people who've already said they're for you. So just like Chuck said, that's the point at which we turn from worrying about convincing people, because if you haven't been convinced at this point in the campaign, you may not get convinced. You know, because the campaign's been going, this is a very short campaign, but we started in March and had a 7-person primary election. It's nonpartisan technically, but I think everyone's been a registered Democrat who's run, I think. So it started with 7. The top 2 vote getters go on to November. So we had the primary in June, and then the November election. You know, most campaigns in the United States probably run, I would say probably a year is average for a larger campaign. So this one's been somewhat compacted.
Although it doesn't feel that way.
It feels like it's been 10 years long. This has been a very long campaign. In the primary election campaign, our budget was about $400,000. So some of that money had been raised in the previous 4 years, so there was a little bit to start with, and then you had to add to it. And then we couldn't start raising money for the general election until July 1st. So then you have from July 1st to November to raise $400,000 again.
Yeah, it's like 2 different campaigns. You do them over and over again.
So we had to just turn around and do that, and you've only got, you know, you have to raise $100,000 a month at that point.
You know,
What I say and what I do may not always come clear through, but I'm really trying to express myself to you. Boy, I'm feeling so divided. I did everything to fight it, but I guess my heart decided to fall into you. This time I won't feel. This time love's for real. This time I want the prince and the fairy tale. This time I won't feel. This time love's for real. This time I want the prince and the fairy tale. Say you won't give up on me, and I shall believe in